Cable Television Network.
Session of China's top political advisory body gets underway in China. Suspected herdsman killed at least 16 in Benue State, Nigeria. And President Bouteflika offers to leave within 1 year if re-elected. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, 6 African countries blacklisted by the EU for poor monetary controls. And in sports, Egypt claims gold in the final day of the 2019 Pentathlon World Cup. Now, as the second session gets underway of the 13th National People's Congress, many outside China are eagerly looking in. The trade war with the US and the recent summit between the US and the DPRK were among the topics addressed during today's NPC press event. CGTN's Hona reports from the Great Hall of the People in Beijing.
It is Zhang Yesui's second year as NPC spokesperson. The former deputy foreign minister once served as Chinese ambassador to the United States. When answering a question from CNN, he said the interests of China and the United States are deeply interwoven, adding that a confrontational China-US relationship does not benefit anyone.
The new issues should not be dealt with a Cold War mentality. Against the background of globalization, China has a clear policy towards its relationship with the U.S., which is based on no conflict and no confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation.
While the second Trump-Kim summit in Hanoi ended with no agreement, the world is watching China's reaction. Zhang spoke positively about the Hanoi summit and said China will continue to make efforts in its own way.
China believes the Hanoi summit between Pyongyang and Washington was constructive, and Beijing will continue to play a role in the Korean Peninsula issue.
The national defense budget dominates headlines at each year's NPC press conference. This time, though Zhang did not give a specific figure, he said China's defense expenditures for the protection of the nation's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity, and does not pose any threat to other countries.
It's seen as a threat by many nations in the Asia-Pacific region.
China's defense spending in 2018 accounted for about 1.3% of our GDP for the year, while some developed nations maintained a 2+% proportion.
Zhang was also confronted with questions on whether the Belt and Road Initiative is a, quote, debt trap for others. He said China takes debt, sustainability and Belt and Road cooperation very seriously, that the country would never impose its will on others. Zhang also answered questions on artificial intelligence legislation and the top legislature highlights for the coming year.
From China-U.S. relations to the highlights of China's legislation, NPC spokesperson answered 11 questions from the media. And now, all eyes are on how China's lawmakers and political advisors will provide solid solutions to all the pressing problems. Hona, CGTN, Beijing.
Chinese lawmakers are set to begin their annual session tomorrow. Officials have briefed the media on the key topics that will be discussed over the next 2 weeks. Wang Tongshuan has the details.
Voices to be heard. Nearly 3,000 deputies gathering in the capital Beijing, representing the public. They will attend the annual session of National People's Congress. NPC spokesperson Zhang Yesui briefed the media ahead of the event.
The session will stay committed to party leadership, the running of the country by the people, and law-based governance, and earnestly perform its functions stipulated in the Constitution and the law. It will be a democratic, results-oriented, and inspiring session of unity.
The top lawmaking body will review and vote on the draft foreign investment law. It will ensure that foreign investment activities won't be affected by policy changes down the road, including at the local level. That's only one of the many measures the country has planned to greet the world with open doors.
It is a fundamental change to China's foreign investment management system, and it will help create a more open, transparent, and predictable environment for investors and provide stronger legal guarantee for greater opening across the board.
Trade and economy especially grabbed reporters' attention. Confronted with uncertainties in the domestic and global markets, how can China turn pressure into momentum? Here's Zhang's commenting on China-US trade tensions.
If history teaches us anything, that is, both sides stand to gain from cooperation and lose with confrontation, and cooperation is the best option for both sides. To use the old Cold War mentality to deal with new challenges in this globalized world is just not the right way to go.
Deputies have always been sure to keep their attention on the livelihoods of people. The past year saw an increase of over 13 million jobs, individual income taxes reduced, and nearly 14 million Chinese citizens escaping from poverty. Zhang says China's expectation for a better life has brought new tasks for the legislature to work on.
In this new year, in general, the Standing Committee will continue to carry out its legislative responsibility in a sound, democratic, and law-based manner, and improve the quality of legislation, accelerate the lawmaking process.
Plenty always remains to be done when it comes to government work, whether it be economy, healthcare, or the living environment. Deputies have their work cut out for them in this year's meeting. Bang Xuan, CGTN.
Well, let's go live now to Beijing, China, where CGTN's Uche Okoronkwo is following China's political season for us. Uche, the two sessions annual meeting got underway yesterday. What is on the agenda today?
Well, thank you, Lindy. And as you mentioned there, China's political season is certainly in full swing. Now, some of the key things we're looking at this year is exactly how are they going to design policies in order to stop growth from slowing further in the country. And certainly, what's their plan in terms of relations with the U.S. and relations with Africa and the rest of the world going forward. Now, as was mentioned earlier, yesterday was the opening session of the National Political Advisory Board, the CPPCC, and their role was to discuss some of the proposals that will determine China's political and economic strategy for the coming year. Tomorrow we'll see the opening of the National People's Congress, which is basically the national legislature, and they'll be talking about passing some of those laws like that foreign investment law that the rest of the world is watching so closely. Now today, as also mentioned, there was a press conference by the NPC, a preliminary press conference. And let me give you some of the highlights that are pertinent, especially to Africa, that were talked about at the press conference. They talked about the Belt and Road Initiative and some of the major tasks that they have achieved so far. The spokesperson highlighted the fact that China has had up to 152 nations and international organizations sign cooperation documents with the country so far on the Belt and Road Initiative. They also talked about that draft foreign investment law and highlighted the fact that it will be submitted to the NPC on March 8th, and we'll hear the final word and the final structure on that law on March 15th. And of course, as we know, foreign investors, Africa, are looking to hear on whether we're going to see barriers lowered in terms of doing business with China going forward.
And so indeed, I imagine African countries are paying attention to what happens in China's annual political season. Tell us a little bit more about how this political season will impact direct relations with Africa.
Now, of course, we mentioned that foreign investment law, it will basically define the terms of engagement between China and the continent going forward. I just talked about the lowering of barriers. Of course, it will define how open China's economy will be to businesses going forward. Another aspect is those tough U.S. and China trade talks that are currently ongoing. One key concern for the U.S. is how China will approach intellectual property laws going forward. And of course, that will trickle down and impact Africans who are looking to do business in China going forward. The trade war has also had a significant impact on the global economy, or rather global economic growth. And of course, that has affected the continent. So finding out how China is going to approach the U.S. Going forward in terms of negotiations could impact how that trade war has impacted the economy. Now, China is also a major consumer of Africa's commodities. As we've talked about, growth has been slowing down in China. We're going to hear their growth forecasts during the NPC meeting. Most analysts are expecting to hear President Xi announce 6 to 6.5% growth, which means growth targets are going to lower. And of course, that's going to impact China and Africa engagement in terms of trade and commodities going forward.
Uche Koronko, thank you so much for that update, joining us there live from Beijing. Now, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the most powerful political advisory body in China. But what is the CPPCC and what are its major functions? Here's an explainer.
Democracy, a word that comes from the Western world, is closely associated with elections. But here in China, apart from elections, there's the concept of a consultative democracy, a distinct political system of its own. Xi Jinping, the General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee, says, quote, "The essence of people's democracy is that the people get to discuss their own affairs." This is what the CPPCC, also known as the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, does to realise China's democracy. It's neither a body of state power nor a policy-making organ. Rather, it serves as a political advisory body, kind of like a think tank, made up of more than 2,000 people from all aspects of Chinese society. They include democratic parties, representatives of religion and ethnic minority groups, and people from the worlds of business, science, sports, and entertainment. Members discuss major principles and policies proposed by the central and local governments. It gives proposals on matters concerning political, economic, cultural, and social affairs. It supervises the implementation of the Constitution and the country's rules and regulations. You may not know, but the advisory body gave birth to the People's Republic of China in 1949. During its first plenary session that year, Beijing was made the capital city, and the five-star red flag was made the national flag. Since China's reform and opening up formally began in 1978, the CPPCC has played a major role in supporting China's economic and social development pursuits. Deng Xiaoping, then chairman of the 5th National Committee of the CPPCC, said the organisation should take into account any factors that maintain political stability and boost the modernisation of China. Looking ahead, next year is the deadline of China's 13th five-year plan. It outlines how China will accomplish its task of building a moderately prosperous society and eliminate extreme poverty throughout the country.
Based on our country's new development goals, we should pursue a more balanced focus on improving people's lives and promoting social and economic development, and be prepared to fight against the major risks faced by businesses, work on targeted poverty alleviation, and fight pollution.
To achieve that, the CPPCC will continue to fulfill its role in consulting China.
Now, in other news, let's go to Nigeria, where at least 16 people have been killed in a fresh attack on 3 communities in Benue State. The attacks took place in Tsetuma, Chiachia and Tsetargu communities in Gwer West. Herdsmen disguised as military officials are suspected to be behind the attacks. Locals say there were reprisal attacks for cows that were allegedly stolen on Friday. Nigerians in the area have appealed to the federal government to deploy police to avert further attacks. This latest attack comes just 10 days after suspected Fulani herdsmen attacked Ebete and Usha ward in Agatu, killing no fewer than 17 people. Well, CGTN's Kelechi Emekilam has been following the story. She joins us now live from Abuja with more. Kelechi, of course, these latest reports seems like quite a devastating attack. What more can you tell us?
The issue with these sort of attacks is that it always comes with a reprisal attack. So now the state government is calling for calm on all sides. Also, the police says it has launched an investigation into the incident and would ensure that the perpetrators are made to face the full wrath of the law.
And Benue seems to have become something of a hotspot for these types of attacks by herdsmen. What is the government doing in the long run, really, to improve security in the region?
Well, it's believed to be a reprisal attack. There are reports that cattle rustlers had stolen up to about 22 cattle belonging to the herders, and that they were traced to the home of a community leader. But the community leader did say that those cattle were his. Some of them were said to have been taken to the market for sale, and well, this is what caused the crisis.
And just tell us a bit more about security efforts, broadly speaking, when it comes to these particular conflicts with herdsmen.
Well, in fact, it's a major, very major issue for that has led to many deaths and displacements, in fact running into hundreds of thousands. And that's why the military launched what it tagged the Operation Wild Stroke last year, targeting herdsmen, armed herdsmen and armed militia in Benue, not only in Benue but Taraba and Zamfara states, which have also been hit by such clashes. Although the reports of killings have reduced compared to previous years, it's not been completely eliminated. Also, there's been talks that have been initiated by government with stakeholders, including the herders and farming communities, to broker peace. So these are some of the processes or the things that authorities have been doing to try and calm the situation there.
And with the elections now out of the way, is it likely that President Buhari is going to put this high on his agenda?
Well, it's expected that the president would continue to, you know, on the works that he has done as regards security. He came in 2015 promising that he would improve on the security situation, starting from the northeast, where Boko Haram has, you know, rampaged the environment there and caused a lot of mayhem. But then also this one has risen, and it's put the government on its toes. So it's expected that the government would perhaps increase military intervention in the area just to make sure that the area is safe and secure for people there. And also it's expected that they would continue to broker talks between both parties, both the farming communities and the herders.
Kelechi Emekilam, thank you so much joining us there live from Abuja. You are watching Africa Live. Here's what's still ahead on the program. 4 U.S. tourists and a Kenyan pilot killed in a helicopter crash. And Ethiopia's Prime Minister and Eritrea's President are in Juba to push for a peace deal.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that are to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start here in Kenya, where 4 American tourists and their Kenyan pilot were killed when their helicopter crashed near a remote island on Lake Turkana in northwest Kenya. Police reported that the crash occurred on Sunday evening after the helicopter went off radar. The helicopter was returning from Lobolo tented camp, where an accompanying helicopter took off safely. A search mission found the wreckage and the bodies early this morning. Police say the identities of the passengers will not be revealed until their families have been informed. The pilot, however, has been confirmed to be Mario Magonga. He was a pilot for Kenya's Deputy President William Ruto, and until 2015 he worked from Tropic Air, a local charter service. The reason for the crash is not yet known. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki are in the South Sudanese capital of Juba. President Salva Kiir says the two leaders are on a mission to find ways of pushing forward the country's peace process. Some groups have rejected a peace deal signed last year between the main opposition groups and are still fighting the government. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
The Ethiopian Prime Minister is visiting South Sudan for the first time since he came to power, and he is joined by Eritrean President. His first visit since the peace deal was signed last year. Eritrea was not part of the South Sudan's peace process, but now it wants to play a role. Ethiopia played a major part in South Sudan's peace deal negotiations, and the final peace agreement was signed in Addis Ababa in September last year. But there are groups that rejected the peace agreement. They have continued fighting. However, the groups are reportedly now in contact with the mediators from the East African Regional Group, also known as IGAD, on how they can join the peace process. And South Sudan's government says the visit of the two leaders will help move the peace process forward.
There is a lost timetable on the revitalized peace agreement, and the three leaders will work out how best the lost time could be actually addressed.
South Sudan's parties to the agreement are scheduled to form a new unity government in May this year. IGAD says it's making an effort to ensure that all groups are part of the peace process. But now all eyes will be on whether this state visit makes a difference. Patrick Oyet, CGTN,
so where are you going
Juba,
to next?
South Sudan.
Tunisia has hosted a regional summit on food security in the Arab Maghreb Union. Ministers from 5 member states focused on improving food security, especially in Libya. Experts also outlined the difficulties in guaranteeing food supply to millions of people, as CGTN's Adnan Chouachi reports.
The capital city Tunis hosted the 18th session of the Maghreb Ministerial Committee on Food Security. Ministers and officials from Algeria, Morocco, Libya, Mauritania and Tunisia attended the high-level meeting.
This is the most successful meeting of ministers from the 5 Maghreb countries. The Maghreb region is facing unprecedented environmental, economic and security challenges which could affect food security. Food security and sustainability are among our priorities as decision makers.
The Tunisian Minister of Agriculture and his Libyan counterpart agreed on building cooperation in plant and seed production and distribution by private operators and making Tunisian experts available to the Libyan side in the control and development of production techniques.
We agreed on the genetic improvement of livestock through creating genetic improvement programs, artificial insemination, sharing expertise, and drawing on the Tunisian experience in livestock breeding. The agreement also provides for cooperation in intensification of forage crops and techniques of fodder storage.
Concerning forests and pastures, Maghreb Union ministers agreed on establishing common programs to share expertise on forest and pastoral seeds, fitting out pastures, combating desertification, and sharing experience in techniques to combat sand encroachment.
We will share knowledge on forest trees and shrubs resisting drought and salinity, as well as expertise in monitoring the emergence and spread of the agricultural diseases. We will organize training sessions specializing in water management to benefit from the Tunisian experience in storing and management of surface water and mountain lakes.
According to experts, the concept of food security has evolved. Initially, it focused mainly on availability of food and on food production. Then it was expanded to include the accessibility to food and its utilization.
According to the Tunisian authorities, the 5 ministers of agriculture in the Maghreb region stated their commitment to improve their agricultural cooperation through easing administrative framework governing trade between their countries. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And let's head to Madagascar now, where an outbreak of measles has killed at least 1,000 people since October last year. And most of those affected are children. The World Health Organization is warning that unless drastic measures are taken, the disease will pose a great danger globally.
In one of the wards of Diego Suarez Military Hospital in Antananarivo, Volazafi nurses her grandchild. The journey to the hospital was not easy as measles ravaged the young child.
We had porters and companions as we walked to the main road, far from our home. We continued on foot until we reached the hospital. We needed a helping hand to carry the child because we also had luggage as well.
She's one of the lucky few who have managed to get medical attention. An outbreak of measles has left over 1,000 people dead in Madagascar since last year, with children and young adults accounting for the highest number. The startling figures could be a wake-up call for many in Madagascar who consider measles to be a common disease.
Measles has always been considered a common disease. People use traditional remedies to treat the disease. The population has somewhat neglected the dangers of measles, and they only come to hospital when it is at a really complicated stage.
It is not just Madagascar that is at risk of a major measles outbreak. According to the World Health Organization, infection cases rose by 50% globally in 2018, with 136,000 deaths reported. Major economies have not been spared either. Countries such as France, Brazil, and Ukraine registered a spike in the spread of the highly infectious disease. Other countries at risk include Serbia, Albania, Liberia, Georgia, Yemen, Montenegro, and Greece. The World Health Organization and UNICEF say misinformation is a great concern since the measles vaccine is easily affordable and available. Lack of proper nourishment is also aiding in the spread of the disease.
Malnutrition paves the way for measles, and the more severe cases of measles are often reported in children who are malnourished.
The disease is characterized by rashes on the body and a high fever. It causes blindness and inflammation of the brain. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
The Democratic Republic of Congo's new president, Felix Tshisekedi, has pledged to free all political prisoners in the next 10 days. The president made the announcement in the capital Kinshasa on Saturday while unveiling his emergency program for the next 100 days. CGTN's Chris Ochamuringa has more.
President Felix Tshisekedi told a gathering of ministers and foreign envoys that he will free the men and women in order to consolidate democracy in the country. He also promised to allow political exiles to return home. He made the remarks while presenting his emergency program for his first 100 days. Dozens of Congolese citizens were arrested between 2016 and 2017 for staging protests against former President Kabila's continued stay in power after his term had ended. and some of the protesters were activists from Mr. Tshisekedi's political party, the Union for Democracy and Social Progress. Mr. Tshisekedi took over office from Joseph Kabila in January after an election that was disputed by the opposition. He was even accused of making a deal with Mr. Kabila, but both the former and current president have denied such a deal happened. And some observers hope that the release of all political prisoners is an indication that the president will keep his own campaign promises and run the country's affairs independently of Joseph Kabila. Chris Chamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
After facing a backlash from a fifth election bid in the upcoming April polls, Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has offered to step down after a year if he's re-elected.
President Abdelaziz Bouteflika made the announcement in a letter published to citizens. It was read on national television on his behalf.
The candidate for the presidential election on April 18th, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, has today made public a letter to the Algerian people, the content of which is as follows.
The 82-year-old leader has been facing mass protests over his 20 years in power. Tens of thousands of demonstrators have been rallying in cities around Algeria. They called on Bouteflika not to submit election papers for the upcoming polls.
I have listened to and heard the heartfelt cry of protesters, in particular the thousands of young people who have called out to me about the future of our country. These young people have expressed an understandable worry. Faced with the uncertainties which stir them, I have the duty and the will to pacify the hearts and minds of my compatriots.
If re-elected, President Bouteflika is committed to stepping aside from power after 1 year. The plan includes organizing an early presidential election.
I will take the following commitments before God and the Algerian people: holding just after the election a national, inclusive and independent conference to debate, elaborate on and adopt political, institutional, economic and social reforms which should make up the bedrock of a new system to renew the national Algerian state in harmony with the aspirations of our people, organizing an early presidential election in accordance with the timetable set by the Independent National Conference. I commit to being a candidate for this election.
Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's coming up in your business news. 6 African countries blacklisted by the EU for poor monetary controls. And Kenya opens the sale of a $500 million bond to finance infrastructure projects.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The European Commission has blacklisted 23 nations having massive deficiencies on their anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regimes. Botswana, Ethiopia, Ghana, Libya, Nigeria and Tunisia are among the African countries mentioned. According to the Commission, the blacklisted countries pose a risk to the EU's financial system. It adds that the banking and financial sector should exercise caution and scrutinize transactions involving those countries. Banks covered by the EU anti-money laundering rules are subject to increased checks on financial operations to identify suspicious money flows. Egyptian tobacco company Eastern Company SAE's shares were up 5%, opening at $1 per share on the Egyptian Stock Exchange. The company has sold 95% of the shares in a private sale. The remainder is to be sold at a public offering that began on Sunday. The IPO is expected not to exceed $93.3 million. The government is planning on launching a sales program in state companies to strengthen the capital market and attract more liquidity on the stock exchange. Other state-owned companies will offer shares over the next 5 years to help support public finances. A Saudi business delegation that comprises of executives and CEOs from 100 companies are in Cairo to discuss partnerships with their Egyptian counterparts. The meetings also focus on how both sides can work together on investment projects in Africa. Yasser Hakim has more.
Saudi Arabia is Egypt's largest Arab trade partner and largest Arab investor in the country.
The Saudi kingdom imports 6% of Egypt's total exports, while the Saudi non-petroleum exports to Egypt reached $4 billion in 2018. As for investments, the total investments from the Saudi public and private sectors into Egypt is $54 billion. Since the start of 2019, there are 10 major projects that have been signed and up and under construction as we speak.
Most of the Saudi investments in Egypt are concentrated in the real estate and tourism sectors. But the largest Saudi business delegation to visit Egypt in a while is studying opportunities in other fields, such as renewable energy or industrial production.
The Saudi businessmen are not just here to discuss the Egyptian market, but they're also studying opportunities to penetrate the African market as well.
This coincides with Egyptian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika receiving the helm of the African Union in 2019.
Egyptian companies will be leading Saudi-Egyptian consortiums to invest in the continent in various sectors, but focusing more on industrial sector, services and the agricultural production.
These meetings are considered information gathering, and the delegation is planning a second visit soon to Cairo to sign final contracts. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The Central Bank of Kenya has opened the sale of a 25-year bond to raise up to $500 million for funding infrastructure projects. According to the CBK, the tax-free bond started selling on Friday with a 12.2% coupon as its auction is set for March 19th. Investors are to cash in between $1,000 and $200,000. Half of the outstanding principal amount is to be paid out in March 2034, with the redemption date set for February 2044. The bonds offered for the auction received $783 million bids, recording a notch performance of 156.5%. The proceeds are to fund projects in the transport, water and energy sectors. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, has encouraged Kenya to tap into the Ethiopian aviation sector. Ethiopia plans to privatize its national carrier as the Prime Minister seeks efficiency in the operation of the continent's largest airline. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi spoke to Kenneth Kane, the country manager of Kenya Airways in Ethiopia.
We started operating to Ethiopia in 1978. At that time, we were operating 2 flights a week. Gradually, we went to 3 flights a week. Then we went to 5 flights a week. Then we went to daily flights per week. And to date, we are operating 17 flights a week into and out of Nairobi. Of course, beyond Nairobi, we operate to Far East, Middle East, Europe, and recently, our youngest route in town is to JFK, that is New York.
The Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, has talked about aviation being one of the sectors that are open for investment, especially by the Kenyan community. How exciting is that for Kenya Airways?
Yes, of course, that is exciting news, and I was quite elated to hear this mentioned by Dr. Abiy. It presents opportunities for us to move our frequencies from 17 to hopefully even 28 times a week. And I say this because it presents an opportunity for increased traffic. When there is increased aviation investment in Ethiopia, that means there is increased traffic between Addis and Nairobi. And that, of course, gives me an upper hand as an operator operating to Nairobi. We are only 2 operators operating to Nairobi on a daily basis. That is Kenya Airways and ET. And if there is more investments in the aviation sector, then it really presents a huge opportunity for me as Kenya Airways.
Beyond being competitors on the runway, do we have any cooperation between Ethiopian Airlines and Kenya Airways?
Within the African continent, the African carriers only control less than 20% of the market share. 80% are controlled by foreign airlines. And the reason why I look at Ethiopian Airlines as a partner is we complement each other's efforts in terms of trying to grab some business to remain within the African carrier, operating within Africa. That is, of course, Ethiopian and Kenya Airways being major players. And of course, the presence of Ethiopian Airlines Aviation School also, and the presence of Kenya Airways Training School, the Pride Center in Kenya, gives us an opportunity to, one, exchange ideas, two, ease our costs in terms of training costs. We save a lot because Ethiopia is just 2 hours away from Nairobi, and exchanging technology, exchanging our spare parts, exchanging knowledge and exchanging expertise gives us an upper hand over other airlines that still rely on, for example, flying to Europe to maintain their aircrafts and all those.
We are now seeing Kenya and Ethiopia speaking more about implementing the 2012 Special Status Agreement that is supposed to enable them do more business together. What are some of the issues that you hope this agreement will iron out, especially for your operations from Ethiopia?
I think with this bilateral opening right now, it will present a very good opportunity for us to ease the way we do business out of Ethiopia, how we repatriate our monies from Ethiopia to Kenya. It will be a thing of the past, and I'm really hoping that this is actually fast-tracked because it's been a major bottleneck for us as Kenya Airways, also other airlines operating out of Ethiopia.
Let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Egypt rescues 2,000-year-old catacombs from rising water.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Egypt has announced the completion of a project to save world-famous catacombs of Qom al-Shokfa from rising waters. The catacombs are renowned for funerary architecture, blending ancient Egyptian, Greek and Roman art. They were in use from the 1st to the 4th century AD.
The Qom al-Shokfa location has been threatened by water since its discovery in 1900.
The Qom al-Shokfa area is a unique antiquities area suffering from groundwater, as the consultant of the project assumed, since it was discovered in the beginning of the 20th century. A lot of projects have been made to save it. The most important one was made by the Supreme Council of Antiquities in 1995. It is an ambitious project, but unfortunately, the water rose again.
This prompted Egypt to launch a massive drainage project supported by the United States Agency for International in 2017.
We established 6 wells, each 42 meters in depth, to gather all the underground water, to transfer it to El Mahmouda Canal and then to the sea. These are the steps to get rid of this water.
The catacombs of Qom al-Shokfa are unique in that they have a labyrinth of open spaces and tombs, and it's the largest tomb catacomb in Egypt.
Visitors can now visit and reach the 3rd level of the tomb, which had been completely underwater since 100 years ago. The attraction is considered one of the 7 wonders of the Middle Ages. Chom Rono, CGTN.
To South Africa now, where 25,000 car enthusiasts descended on the Cape Town Motor Show. The event took place over 2 days at the Grand West Casino and Entertainment World Centre. Attractions this year included vintage cars, drift car racing, and a showcase of the latest models and concept cars from leading manufacturers. One of the other highlights for vintage car fans was the opportunity to win a custom rebuild of a 1970s MGB GT.
We've got 12 main attractions this year. Not only do we have things for cars, bikes, trucks, drifting, we've added stance wars, we've added sound-offs, 4x4s, all that kind of thing. The idea is to have an overall show for anyone with an interest in motoring, whether you like cars, bikes, if you're a petrolhead, or if you love the vintage cars.
And we're here today to get some ideas. We build cars and we love the classics, especially the GT40 that we saw earlier on in the hall. And the kids, we've taken drifting, and there's some great new products here. We love to see the new brake systems on these cars and just really get ideas and have a look at these beautiful machines that you got here.
Don't forget the Ferrari.
Still in South Africa, the Soweto Gospel Choir recently won the Grammy for Best World Music Album. The group was recognized for the album Freedom Song, a 12-track tribute to Nelson Mandela, released to mark his 100th year of Madiba's birth.
The announcement of the Grammy Awards sparked an explosion of excitement across South Africa.
When he said Soweto, then we jumped out. Like, it took long, like, yo. And then we jumped out, and the very humbling part is that when everybody gets to celebrate you and they stand up and they applaud you, that was amazing.
The Freedom Song album earned the choir its third Grammy in its 17-year existence, in addition to an Emmy and a debut album called Voices of Heaven, which reached #1 on Billboard's World Music chart.
Freedom album, it was a celebration of Nelson Mandela and celebration of the unsung and fallen heroes. So it was in that concept. I chose songs that spoke about Mandela. I chose songs that spoke about Stephen Biko. I chose songs that spoke about our late musicians like Mary Makeba, who was an activist as well.
The Freedom Song album gives a modern twist to so-called struggle songs rooted in South Africa's apartheid past. And the group went back to Soweto, the southeast township on the edge of Johannesburg, known worldwide as a symbol of resistance, to find its inspiration.
It was the 100th centenary of Nelson Mandela. So everyone in the world actually was caught an attention in a way that South Africa is celebrating something very special. So that's where the idea started. That's where we had to go back to Soweto and find out what happened back in the days and bring it to the world. So yeah, it was a celebration.
Much of the choir's captivating sound is composed and arranged in indigenous South African languages, including Zulu, Xhosa, and even Afrikaans. Yet some of the biggest audiences are in Europe and America.
Our signature sound, it's something simple. It's something that it's raw. It's something that it's proudly South African. It's something that it comes from the streets of Soweto. It's something that it's not, like most of our singers are not musically trained, but what we do is that we learn by ear.
And over time, the group's sound has evolved but maintained the rich story that has led to a surge in its popularity, sustaining an apparent insatiable global demand for its performances. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. Egypt claims gold in the 2019 Pentathlon World Cup in Cairo.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.